They thought silence would make you panic. That's why they stopped calling. That's why they stopped texting. That's why they pulled away. That's why they started acting cold. That's why they started ignoring you. Because they really believed that if they removed their attention, you would lose your mind. They thought you start chasing. They thought that you would start wondering what you did wrong. They thought that you would start apologizing. They thought you start questioning your worth, because people who use silence as a weapon are usually trying to control your emotions. Think about that. If somebody knows that every time they pull away, you come running, why would they ever stop pulling away? It works. It's a game. It's a strategy. It's conditioning. And a lot of people don't even realize that they're being conditioned. Every time somebody ignores you, you work harder. Every time somebody pulls away, you move closer. Every time somebody withholds affection, you start overperforming, trying to earn something that should have never been earned in the first place, like love and respect, communication, and basic human decency. And here's the craziest part. The person doing it starts believing that they're more valuable than they actually are. Because every time you chase, their ego grows. Every time you've begged, their confidence grows. Every time that you panic, they feel more important. They begin thinking, I've got them. They need me. They're never going to leave. They'll always come back. And that's where they make their biggest mistake. Because eventually something changes inside of you. Eventually you get tired. Eventually you stop performing. Eventually you'll stop chasing. Eventually you stop trying to convince somebody else to choose you, especially when they've already made it clear that they don't even want you. And here's what they never expected. The silence that was supposed to break you became peaceful. You stopped checking your phone. You stopped wondering where they were. You stopped trying to read between the lines. You stopped waiting. You stopped obsessing. Not because you stopped caring overnight, but because somewhere in the silence, you started hearing yourself again. See, sometimes people are so loud that you can't even hear your own intuition. Sometimes somebody else's chaos becomes so normal, you forget what peace even feels like. And then one day they disappear, thinking that you'll panic, thinking that you'll collapse, thinking that you will beg and chase and kick and scream. But instead, for the first time in years, your nervous system gets a chance to breathe. And suddenly you realize, I haven't felt this peaceful in a long time. And that's when everything changes. Because once peace becomes more valuable than their attention, they lose all ability to control you. You see, a lot of people mistake access for value. Just because somebody has access to your life doesn't mean that they're adding value to it. Sometimes the loudest thing in your life is also the thing that's keeping you from hearing yourself. And that's what silence has a way of exposing. It exposes who was adding peace and who was adding pressure. It exposes who was bringing clarity and who was bringing the confusion. It exposes who actually loved you and who simply loved having access to you, because there's a difference. And a lot of people don't actually want a relationship. They just want access to your time, access to your intuition, access to your attention, access to your energy, access to your forgiveness, access to your empathy, access to your heart. And as long as they have that access, they're satisfied. They don't necessarily have to treat you well. They don't necessarily have to respect you. They don't necessarily have to communicate, because in their mind, they've already convinced themselves that you're not going anywhere. And that's a dangerous place to be. When somebody believes that you'll never leave, they stop appreciating the fact that you stayed. And that's why they become so careless. That's why they become so comfortable. That's why they stop trying. Because certainty without gratitude creates entitlement. And entitlement always destroys relationships. And I'm not just talking romantic ones either. Friendships, families, even business relationships. You see, people who think you'll always be there often stop treating you like they should. Then one day you decide, you change. And it's not because you became bitter, not because you became cold, but because you became aware. And awareness changes everything. Once you become aware, you can't unknow what you've seen. You start noticing the patterns. You start noticing that every disagreement ends the exact same way. Every difficult conversation ends with silence. Every time they don't get what they want, they disappear. Every time you set a boundary, they withdraw. Every time you stop overgiving, they become distant. And eventually you realize this is not communication. This is control. This is not for me. You see, there's a quote by Viktor Frankl that I've always loved. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And whether you understand that psychologically, spiritually, or philosophically, or simply through your own life experiences, the principle remains the same. Silence doesn't control you. Your interpretation of silence does. And that's powerful, because for years you interpreted silence as some form of rejection. But now you interpret silence as information. You see, information tells you what someone values. Information will tell you how someone communicates. Information tells you whether someone has the emotional maturity and ability to resolve conflict, or whether they expect conflict to resolve itself. And those are two very different type of people. That's why I always tell people, don't chase clarity from someone who's committed to confusion. Protect your peace always instead, because here's the truth. The healthiest relationships you'll ever have won't require you to earn basic communication. They won't require you to beg for no consistency. They won't require you to decode mixed signals. Healthy love isn't confusing. Healthy love communicates. Healthy love repairs. Healthy love takes responsibility. Healthy love doesn't punish you with silence, hoping that you'll panic. No, that's manipulation. What healthy love will do is sit you down and say, let's go through this. And if somebody is incapable of doing that, then believe them. Stop trying to love people into emotional maturity. That's a job that only they can do. And one of the biggest reasons I do what I do is because I help people reinterpret their past so that they can reclaim their future. Because so many people aren't trapped by what happened. They're trapped by what they believed happened to them meant. Maybe their silence didn't mean you weren't enough. Maybe it meant that they didn't know how to communicate. Maybe it didn't mean you were unlovable. Maybe it meant they lacked the emotional tools to build something healthy. And those are two completely different stories. And whichever story you believe will determine the life that you build next. That's why this matters. Because if you continue believing that they ignored you because you wasn't enough, you'll carry that belief into every future situation. But if you reinterpret it and say, they ignored me because silence was the only tool that they knew how to use, now you reclaimed your power. Now you're free. There's a passage that says, perfect love casts out fear. Think about that for a second. If love constantly leaves you afraid to speak, afraid to disagree, afraid they'll disappear, afraid that they'll stop talking to you, that's not the kind of love you're meant to build your life around. You see, fear makes you perform. Love allows you to be. And I think that's one of the greatest transformations a person can experience. That's one of the reasons I wrote Phoenix, From Stability to Power, because personal power isn't about controlling other people. It's about becoming so emotionally grounded within yourself that someone else's silence no longer determines your peace. That's power. That's confidence. That's healing. And here's the beautiful irony. They thought that silence would make you panic, but instead silence became the place where you finally found yourself. You see, they thought that you would chase. Instead, you found peace. They thought that you would beg, but instead you built boundaries. They thought that you would question your worth, but instead you rediscovered it. You see, they thought that you'd remain emotionally dependent, but instead you became emotionally free. The real victory wasn't that they finally understood your value. No, the real victory was that you finally understood it. Because once you know your value, you stop negotiating for what you should be given freely. That love, that respect, that proper communication, the honesty, the consistency. You don't have to earn that. You stop trying to convince people to see what they're determined to overlook. And you simply become someone who protects your peace. Because peace is expensive. It costs you the people who benefited from your confusion, but it's worth every single penny. You see, the real victory wasn't proving them wrong. The real victory was becoming someone who no longer needs them to understand their value. Peace, blessings, love, and power.